Hello, everybody, and welcome to Daz's Friday Zoom chats. Today is going to just be a open forum. Jump in, ask anybody, cross question, discuss away, and most of all, have some fun. So what we're going to do, Paul Smith has joined us, and we don't know how long he's going to be here. So I do have a question for Paul. Now, Anita, since you're here, would you like to ask Paul the question yourself, or do you want me to read it?
I can read it. Let me just find it.
Okay.
I'd much rather Anita read it than Russell did.
That was the psychic training you gave me. See how it prevailed? I knew that.
So, Paul, I have a question for you. How do you know when your students are remote viewing the feedback and not the target site?
Hey, so I will answer that, but I actually am curious to see how Russell will respond to that since he's been at the far end of the table so many times.
I don't know how you know that.
Okay, well, that satisfied my curiosity.
Okay.
As to how you'd answer it.
There was an example given the other week about the temperature at the location.
What?
There was an example given the other week
Oh.
the temperature at the location where this lake was frozen over or where it was not frozen over in the photograph.
Yeah, that actually can help. Sometimes it is just clues from. So an example I use is if your target is the Kremlin in February, and the feedback shows the Kremlin in July, and the student says, "Oh, it's snowy and cold," then that's a pretty good indication they're on target. If they say, "Oh, it's bright, sunny, summer, trees, leaves," that kind of stuff, then it may be AOL or it may be an indicator they're actually looking at the feedback. So a story I tell, which is true, this is a true story back in Fort Meade days during one of the training sessions. And I don't recall if I was the one that did it or if I was monitoring somebody. That's gotten a little hazy, but I'm thinking it was me that was the one that did it, and Skip was my monitor, Skip Atwater. So we had the Eiffel Tower as a training target. I don't use the Eiffel Tower as a training target because it's just too common, right? It's just something that everybody has in their training target. Literally not everybody, but it's a very common practice target. And viewers will come in on this thing and they'll start describing the Eiffel Tower and they'll think, well, this reminds me of the Eiffel Tower. And then they'll shut that out of their head because, oh, it can't be the Eiffel Tower. Everybody gets the Eiffel Tower, Well, if it is the Eiffel Tower, then they've screwed up their own session. So I don't even use it, okay? And I don't usually use these high-profile targets at all. But we did use it at Fort Meade, and it was a National Geographic photo, and there was a woman with an orange raincoat in the foreground of the image. And I'm going to tell it like I was the one that did it, because I think that's what the case was. So come into the target, start describing the Eiffel Tower, and then I start talking about orange and somebody in orange and all that stuff. And Skip, figuratively reached across the table and whacked me a couple of times. And he'd often say, remote viewers are the laziest people in the world. Rather than projecting their consciousness to the other side of the planet, it's much easier to psychically walk around the table and look at the feedback photo. Now, of course, you remember this is a training environment where the viewer knows what the target is. Of course, measures are taken so that the monitor knows what the target is. There's measures taken to make sure the monitor doesn't become aware of what the target is, but still. So that's a way to tell that they're remote viewing their feedback, is when they start telling you stuff that's in the feedback and for absolute sure that that's not something that's still at the target, that it comes from the time the photo was taken, and then they've obviously started looking at over your shoulder, so to speak. And there are times where you may not actually know that. I mean, it isn't 100%, there's not 100% way of telling for sure if somebody has remote viewed their feedback. But quite often you can tell, quite often you can tell. Okay, so one is they'll report data or details that are in the feedback, but aren't at the target anymore. such as the Kremlin example or the orange raincoat example. Another way is that if they come in on the target and they correctly describe it, but they describe it from a perspective that is not at all the same as what the feedback has, that's an indicator. Okay. Now, if it's double blind, you're not going to know whether they're remote viewing the feedback or not until afterwards, and you'll get the feedback and then you might find out. But yeah, so it's not an exact science, obviously, but I very frequently tell, and I don't know if Russell ever was guilty of that. He's felt the lash of my yardstick for other reasons, but but I don't think he's ever been guilty of that. So Andrew, I don't remember. You were so long ago, I can't remember. But
I knew you were going to say that. I just knew it.
I'm sure you were, because so did Rich. I don't remember if Rich did it either. Rich, actually, by the way, you're like my second ever civilian student, I think, weren't you?
Well, there was another guy with me, and I think you had somebody before that.
Yeah, there was one guy before you, and then I had the two of you, and then, but you're a very early adopter. You should come back and audit my class sometime when it's up and running again, because it's significantly improved from then.
Well, it'd be a good excuse to go out west.
There you go. You might get out here and say you don't want to go back. Okay. So that's the best answer I can manage, because there's no guarantee on being able to do it. You just have strategies that increase the odds that you'll figure it out that they're remote viewing their feedback.
Yeah, you'd never mentioned that to me. The thing you had to break me of was remote viewing at the time of the photograph versus in real time.
That's a little bit harder to tell, particularly, for example, in the basic and the intermediate course, because it's real time. So, I guess if you're, so we're having a little bit of a discussion here, I guess, aren't we, rather than a answer Q&A. I guess if you were remote viewing at the time of the photo, you'd report stuff that's in the feedback.
Right.
Yeah.
But
at that point, it'd be really hard to tell whether you're remote viewing the feedback or remote viewing at the time of the target. I believe that you're probably remote viewing feedback in that setting, because I make it very clear in the session, make very clear in the training, that for basic course and intermediate, you're remote viewing real time, what the target is now.
Right, and that was
generally, I've seen people follow that. I've not seen many people violate that. Go ahead.
Well, it was a self-confess. So when you were talking about viewing in real time, I had mentioned I had been priorly instructed to view at the time of the photo.
Oh, yeah, in your previous instructions, yeah.
Correct.
Somebody else, a different provider, yeah.
Correct, and that made a big difference, and it also, provided a couple of surprises where, say, I was viewing something, 8 hours ahead of myself, I would get the sense that it was dark and different evidences that I was actually viewing at the time. So that for me was a big changeover. All right.
Paul, you say you do it in real time?
Yeah.
So what if there's things that you can't feed back on?
There might be, which is why you have the probably correct and can't feed back as responses, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So,
but I should add, for those training targets, particularly the basic course, I pick targets that are well-defined, durable, that aren't going to change dramatically over time. And you want to do that with beginners, because you don't want them to have to be confused about stuff. You start off with the basics, and this is how Ingo did it. It was really quite brilliant. You start off with very concrete, approachable, defined things in order for the student to understand how to acquire the ability to perceive at a distance like this. Then you mix it up once they've mastered all this stuff downstream, which is, some in the intermediate course, and of course the advanced course has lots of that kind of stuff in it, right? So that's the goal. And by the way, this also highlights a problem. There are people who do that teaching methodology where they say remote view the target at the time of the photo. It's totally useless from an operationalist perspective, right? If your goal is to learn how to be operationally a remote viewer and to solve real world problems. Remote viewing at the time of the photo doesn't do you any good at all. You need to be able to remote view as it is at the time. That's where the bread and butter is when it comes to operational remote viewing. And so, and you see Russell struggled with that because he kind of learned a bad process there.
Okay. And just as a side note, that was the only struggle I ever had. So thank you for that, Paul. All right. So Dawn, you had a question for me. Would you prefer to just go ahead and ask it now or have me read it?
I can't find it.
Okay.
Do you have it?
Yes, I do. All right. I'm going to change glasses here. Okay. Having taken Paul Smith's advanced CRV course, you were one of...
No,
Whoops. No, that was not. That was Anita's question for me. I'm sorry. All right. What were the steps that led you to RV? You mentioned some background info in a chat that sounded fascinating, and I would like to explore the topic further. Can you connect the dots for us? And were there any big surprises along the way? There always are. Thanks for the consideration.
Yeah, I mean, the point of this is everybody's got a story about how they get into it, right? And there's interesting things that happen along the way, and I just wanted to sort of open this up a little bit.
Sure. The way I found it was literally I was on the Jeff Rent's website, which is kind of a conspiratorial type website. In the left-hand banner column, I saw the term remote viewing. And I was like, what is that? So I clicked on it, took me eventually to the remote viewing manual, which, having been in the Air Force and being familiar with tech manuals, when I was reading it and realizing it was a military manual and they were talking about the matrix, and I was like, what? So I just became hooked and fascinated right at my first reading. Then I reached out to Paul, who was busy. Did Paul leave? Oh.
No, I'm here.
Oh,
I just muted everything so I wasn't wasting bandwidth.
Oh, shoot. Okay, I thought I was going to be able to say some things about you. So Paul was busy, had a course schedule out about 6 months. I had literally, without kidding around, imagined that it would take me like 90 days to become a professional psychic spy. So I didn't have 6 months to wait for the training. I immediately found training with Ed Dames in Sparks, Nevada, did as much pre-study as I could, went down there, and it was a weekend class. The first thing that happened that literally blew my mind was I was asked to sit with this Hispanic gentleman who had a small amount of English and kind of help him. So Ed had asked us to do a 15-second, freehand sketch on a target that was blind to us. And so I just kind of, knocked out a couple of things. And then I looked over, and this gentleman, probably in his 60s, was going to town. Like, he was drawing buildings, cross streets, just a full city. So Ed was walking around from desk to desk, and he stopped at that guy's desk and said, "Oh, I think you'll be happy when you see the feedback." And he didn't understand the 15-second part. So Ed showed the feedback, and that guy, it was even from the same angle. It was a slightly aerial view of New York City. And I was just, what? It was just crazy how accurate. And he had never experimented. He just heard about it and decided, oh, maybe I'll check this out. So that was the first moment that wowed me. Then the first connection I felt to anything, and I don't think he uses these targets. This was over 10 years ago. So it was a tornado, and I had drawn spirals with arrows on them. And so that was the first feedback that I got, where I said, but it wasn't enough. It didn't convince me. I got back home, and a friend of mine who I've spoken of before, Catherine, is a very good natural remote viewer. What I had done, because she didn't have the money to go on the trip, I had given her Ed Dames's basic DVD course. So she did that for the 4 days that I was gone. I came back and she goes, "Oh, look at this." And I was like, "Oh, no, you're supposed to do your drawing, not, copy the feedback." And she's like, "No, I stopped the DVD when they said to. I did the session, and then I started up." And then I looked at another and another, and they were all 85% or more accurate to the target. Like one of them was a little roller coaster car with 4 people in it, and she literally drew tracks of a roller coaster car and 4 people. So I said, well, we've got to figure this out some other way. So I started creating some blind targets for her, which I would lock away in my office at work about 9-10 miles away. And she did the same thing. And I knew I was the only one in the world that knew what that feedback was. So it was actually very, very powerful, and still to this day, an emotional moment. It was a realization with no doubt. I had pursued meditation, this, that, the other. Nothing was certain. It always had that subjective factor. Well, maybe that's my imagination, or maybe, but that right there, it just
Wows you.
it changed my life, because I
Yeah.
knew that I knew this was trainable, it was repeatable, and it was verifiable. So it's the first time something about us being more expanded as humans than we're normally aware of was real to me. So we carried on for a while. My product was not so good, and I actually got discouraged and just quit doing sessions. But I was hooked at that point on Ingo, studying remote viewing, and I did that for 6 years. A little over 3 years ago, I was sitting here and just, you need to pick up remote viewing again. And, and so I contacted Paul. There was an opening, and here we are.
That's a fascinating story.
Yeah, and Catherine, the person I've spoken of, she's currently our housemate. She's Nancy's best friend of something like 40 years. Paul's seen a couple of her sessions and didn't even post them under Target Vault, because her final drawing was a giveaway to the target. So,
oh wow,
yeah. And with the house now fully involved, Catherine converted over from TRV to CRV via Paul's DVDs. Nancy, my girlfriend, also. And then my brother started fresh with CRV. So now it's just become a family thing, and we all enjoy it. And it's the addition to my life as a result of remote viewing, especially the last 3 years of training. It's you just have to be grateful. That's about the only thing you can say.
yeah. All right. Well, thank you.
Okay, Anita, did you want to ask your question of me, and then we can start spreading this out around and see what people want to say to each other?
All right, I'm not going to read it. I'll just say it again. So very few remote viewers who are doing remote viewing actually have the skill and knowledge of how to work a target on the advanced stage, where they can start drawing not just irregular sketches, but the whole target site. And particularly thinking of the report that you made for the Gaia video with the island and the hillside and the slopes, and you drew every rock and path and such. What's it like once you're in that stage? What is the experience like? Not what method you use, but what's it like once you're that far in the session where you're really getting all of the contour? And are you feeling it out, or do you also see?
Okay, now, Paul, I might have to mute you if you say anything. So those, to be very honest with you, Anita, are rare sessions. That one astounded me. The first time, and Paul spoke of Skip figuratively slapping him across the table. I'll say there were a couple of incidents similar to that in my own training. Okay. The first time where something like that happened, Paul, I was starting to put something and then changing it. You know, I got good data and then I backed away from it. And then finally, Paul, with some emphasis, said, just do a sketch. And I was frustrated and just let my hand go. And it turned out to be a good, at least line representation of the target. So that was the first time where I thought, okay, how do I stop trying to analyze and control the sketch? Should I turn right here, go up here? It's been a very gradual process. There are a lot of sessions where I'm wildly off, or the sketches don't go into that kind of detail. So that particular session you're mentioning was one where Angela Thompson-Smith had made an open call for remote viewers. After the session, or actually it was a couple of months, I believe, or more, she said, would you grant permission for the TV show to use a couple of your sketches? I did not know or have any visual or anything at all. In fact, the times I have had a mental image picture that I tried to then duplicate on the paper were 99% failures. So in that one, I literally just kind of let my hands go and drew those rocks and then kind of put the door, and then something was nagging me with no concrete description. And I just had to put that unusual block of rock above the door. And then when I did, I felt, I felt relief. I felt like I could stop sketching that. The other ones were just kind of doing something that I later learned in one of these chats. Daz showed how he evolved his sketches. And when I started doing that, I just kind of do a couple of lines and then go down and put my finger on the previous sketch and just elaborate on it and then kind of build. One that really helped me, especially in basic, was when Paul taught us air modeling, to actually clear the desk in front of you, take your session paper, put it over, where your writing hand is, and then to reach out and feel. And that produced some incredible results for me. It was like my hands just took an angle or turned a certain way, and then I would just sketch out that little bit. Then I go back to the air modeling, sketch out a little bit more, and then the thing would kind of assemble itself that way. So I wish, that I had that same ability in every session. It just doesn't appear. Now, clay modeling, I really, really loved. As soon as I get that clay, even if I'm just kind of farming it up or warming it up or, starting, I can fill up a stage 6 matrix, which is identical to the stage 4 matrix, in a minute. And I've had some clay models that were pretty successful. So it seems like, and Paul emphasizes this, when you get into the kinesthetics, it's like your body gets more connected and information starts popping in. So does that answer your question? And for the record, I'm going to put this out there because poor Anita's suffered in my hand more than anybody. And she understands that it's out of care and a high respect for her natural ability. So Anita had come up with the idea that one day her and I do a session of a blind target. So she chose a target she was blind to and put it out there. We both did sessions. I went off into La La Land and she had more accurate data and correspondence to the feedback than I did. And there's other times where it could have been the other way around. The point, that I'm making is, first of all, to acknowledge Anita, and second, here I am, a quote unquote advanced student. Here she is using a different modality, and her accuracy when we did a mutual target was higher than mine. Probably the biggest thing that remote viewing has taught me is it's really diminished my urge to be right. And that has crossed over into life and many other things. So anyways, I just wanted to give you that acknowledgement, Anita.
Let me know when that really happens, Russell.
What's that?
Your desire to be right.
Oh, oh boy, the stories I could tell, but all right. Now, one more thing I want to do, and then, we'll pass this conversation around. I would like to introduce Andrew Usher, who's here. Andrew is also a student of Paul. He is basic trained with Paul, and he is one of the admins in Paul's remote viewing, remote perception group. So hello, Andrew, and welcome. Are you there, Andrew?
Yeah, sorry, thanks. I forgot I was on mute. Sorry, yeah. Thank you.
Is there anything you would like to tell on Paul about?
I'm not sure, actually. I got lots of stories, probably none we want to share. So yeah, I'll leave it at that, I think.
Okay. And I see Joff is joined us in his truck while he's driving around Canada. Hello, Joff.
Hey, Russell. Hey, everybody. I'm driving home, so if you see the phone moving around, it's trying to get contact or a signal.
Would you like to tell on Paul for anything?
No, not really. I probably feel the same way about Paul as you do. A lot of admiration, a lot of fun, great sense of humor.
So he offered you $20 too. Okay, I get it.
It was 25.
What?
But
Canadian? Oh, okay.
Canadian, not US. Yeah.
All right. Okay. So anybody else out there, you can ask each other a question. Fabian's here. Daz is here.
I got a question.
Okay, do it.
Why we got Paul here? I'd just like to ask him. Paul, knowing what you know now, and say the government came to you and said, we want to start Stargate back up. We want you to run things now. Do whatever you want to do. You got an unlimited budget. What kind of things would you do different than back from when you guys were in the program? Is there type of things you would do targets? Would you incorporate more viewers? Like, what is there anything different you would have done?
Well, excuse me. I mean, that's a tough question. I'd have to go back and really think that through. I have actually had the opportunity to do that on a limited basis. Several years ago, I got hired by I can't identify anything here, but by a very large American corporation to actually set up a week-long remote viewing effort along the lines of what we might do in a setting like you're proposing here, right? So we pretty much had an unlimited budget within constraints. They wanted to know what it would cost to set it up, and I told them what it would take, and they said, okay. You can't beat that. And it involved 9 viewers and 3 monitors and a couple of analysts and a couple of analysts from the company as well. They furnished the main, the analysts we used were just to do the basic roughing out of what the data was, and then we passed that along to them to compare to what they knew. They were witting, we weren't. And we were there for a week. They actually remodeled the building, gray rooms and everything. And it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of work, but I probably do it pretty much that same way. A debate about remote viewing methodologies, I probably would be open, although I'm pretty much committed to CRV, but I would be open to other people who demonstrated real facility with this stuff. At Fort Meade, we had a variety of folks too. I mean, you had before they started the CRV, you had McMonigle and Ken Bell and Mel Riley and Gemma Foreman and all of these other folks, and they didn't have a set approach other than Skip's the ERV that Skip developed, and of course they had huge success with that. And then we brought CRV in, and we had really big success with that too. And so I would tend to be open to other methodologies. Some I felt like that they played around with that I didn't think were as successful, and that would be, of course, something that I'd weigh out. But what would I do differently? You know, I don't know. That's hard to say. I don't know. I don't feel like I answered your question, but I don't really have a good answer to it. I tried to throw some things out and see if any of it stuck, basically.
Okay, I see Pablo has his hand up. Pablo, do you have a question?
Yeah, thank you, Russell. So basically, I was wondering last week, probably best practices on target management, and probably I shall give a little bit of background, unfortunate background. So where I used to live, there was space where everyone, of the family would go and store, all books, papers. So you can imagine I got a ton of paper, all the sessions. I thought at some moment to start scanning everything. I had the usual home scanner, so I couldn't do that many sessions at a time. And one winter, water came in and most of the things were lost, right? Then I kept my sessions scanned, but was wondering if there's any, good or appropriate way of, disposing of past sessions that you have already scanned or not, or even disposing of targets that you already done.
Daz?
All I can offer is I have thousands. In fact, I have next to me here in the loft here several archive boxes that I haven't chucked away yet, which I should. Nowadays, though, I pretty much scan. For the last 5-6 years, I pretty much scan every session straight away as a PDF. It's even easier now because the last 2 years I pretty much work entirely on tablet now, which I find is to be honest, is a genius way of doing it, especially with an Android tablet, because all my project managers use a piece of project management software called Asana, where they assign projects through, and it's really good because you can coordinate people all over the world through doing that. So I can literally do my session on a tablet, click the send button, and the session as a PDF document is in my email as a backup copy, and at the project manager within 30 seconds. So over the last year, I've pretty much lost all my need for paper whatsoever, which is a great joy to me, because for me it used to add an extra half an hour to each RV session just by scanning it in and then emailing it over to clients and so on. So I don't know what you can do with your past stuff, but with the new stuff, I would definitely recommend either getting a scanner that fed your documents in and automatically PDF'd it. They're quite expensive, about £500 in the UK, so whatever that is dollars. Or move in like many of us here. I know Rick was a bit reluctant to go down this route because he's a bit of a technophobe, but he's now using tablets as well. And maybe look at the tablet route, because it's if you can get good tablets now, or even if you want to use an iPad, you can get a special screen cover for it, which is called Feels Like Paper, and it gives you this resistance, paper-like resistance, when you use the pen on the screen, so it doesn't feel like glass. So it does on some of these tablets now actually feel like real paper, and I think that's probably the best way to go, to be honest.
And that's a quick question there. Do you feel any difference between doing that on paper or whiteboard versus an electronic device?
I don't. For me, I worried about that at first. I thought, will I be able to cope with this? After doing it on paper like 24 years. But no, I didn't feel no difference. And in fact, I actually enjoy doing it on tablet a lot more, because I can literally just pick the tablet up. And I have a big tablet, mine's like 11 inches, quite an expensive one. And I can literally I can take it anywhere in the house or garden, set it down, and literally just go with the pen. And the pens on these tablets nowadays, the technology and the software is just beautiful. And you can do it's got other gimmicks as well. For example, on the one I'm using, as I'm doing the RV session, writing it all down, I can, if I want to, audio dictate everything that's coming through, and the software will actually record the audio alongside the lines you're putting down, so you can actually play it back, and you'll see lines mysteriously appear on paper as you hear my voice saying and stuff. And it's got all other things as well, like you can instantly at a touch of a button convert all your words that you write down as pure text that you can copy and paste. So it has those kind of benefits as well, which when you're doing summaries and if you've got illegible handwriting like mine is sometimes, it converts it quite well that you can then send on to project managers and stuff as well.
Thank you. And this is also for you, Daz, and for everyone. At some moment in time, I created my own target pool. I did it electronically, and I didn't have any issue with it. But again, last week I was wondering whether using the old-fashioned method with the envelopes and storing them in an archive, a little bit vintage, let's say, versus the electronic. Is there any problem with that? Has anyone faced any issue like mixing targets or something like that?
I can't really answer this one because I've never created my own target pool and never worked my own targets in 24 years. I always work targets that other people give me. I don't think I could create a target pool large enough that the human mind wouldn't know what was in that target pool at some point, because there are people out there who can recall home telephone directories of information. So yeah. I just don't want to deceive myself in any way, so I never work my own target pools. But other people might find ways to do that for you.
Anybody else have a question?
So I can say something here. So if you want a really cheap option for PDF and you've got an iPhone, then PDF Genie is really good, because that will take a quick snapshot and convert all your pages really fast to PDF Expert. But I've been using like Daz tablets since way back with the Cintiq. We used that years ago, and we used transcription software, and I found that that's probably one of the best things. And like Daz said, I use feels like paper on the iPad Pro. I find that's really good as well. And we database everything. We have done since 10 years ago. We database all sessions. All the sessions are on a secure cloud database where the PDF comes in, it gets automatically transcribed, and then we pull out all the session information and we catalog it and tag it. And a bit like qualitative research, we codify it. So then we can look at previous sessions and look at statistical correlations between sessions and coordinations. So that's kind of worked for us for quite a lot of years, but that's been done in kind of conjunction with me in a kind of commercial operation. So it works really well for us. But I've never worked my own target pool either. It's not something I believe in. I don't think, like Daz, I think I would probably be conscious of what I've put in the pool. There'll be something there that would attract me to something. I don't think you can do it.
Thank you very much, Andrew.
I'm just curious, Daz, the tablet that you've got, is that the Onyx tablet?
I started off with the Remarkable paper tablet, which is essentially is what they call e-ink. So it's a bit like if you've ever seen the Kindles. So it's black and white, very low power consumption, because it only ever uses power when the screen refreshes, and then there's no power use at any other stage. I started off on that, and it's really good for anyone starting out and wanting to move to a tablet, because it doesn't do anything other than take notes and help you sketch, and then you can email it to yourself or email it to a cloud. It doesn't have any apps like any other pro tablet out there. So I started off on that, but to be honest, I find the what I call the UI or user interface pretty clunky on it, because it's based on its own technology, Linux or Unix or something like that, and it just didn't feel right to me. It was a bit clunky. And now I use the Galaxy 7 Plus, Galaxy Tab 7 Plus, 11.4 inch screen with it's a tablet, but you attach it to a keyboard and it's essentially a laptop as well. It's so powerful, but it's not cheap. It's like 800 pounds in the UK. I don't know what that is in dollars. Although I think they're doing a deal this week where you can get them for like several £100s.
Is this a Windows thing or is this an Android thing?
It's an Android tablet.
Okay.
And the benefit from that of that and the Apple ones over the Remarkable is that on the app stores for both those tablets, there are literally hundreds of different drawing and note-taking apps that you can trial. And they all come with their good and bad capabilities. But there are some really good applications out there. You can have like 10 different pens, 20 different thickness nibs. You can customize everything, which I find is more beneficial than the Remarkable. But saying that, I had a look today, and the first generation Remarkables are going on eBay secondhand for around about £100, which is, you know, a fifth of what they originally were. So for a small investment, you can get a really good dedicated RV tablet now.
All right.
Anybody have a burning question or something they want to share?
Okay.
Go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, I have kind of two questions. The first one is super easy and quick, so I'll get to that. I'm teaching someone or showing them a little bit about remote viewing, and I don't have templates that I use. So if anyone has templates that are free of copyright and are respectful, if you can send me that just so that I can show them, here's what some people do when they're working stages, they use these templates. And now here's the real interesting question. The question is if anyone did independent experiments that worked before knowing about CRV. And as a background, of course, I've heard about Joseph McMoneagle doing drawings about a mystery object in another room when he was a kid. Him and his sister used to do that together. Then years before I knew about remote viewing, I started asking myself if I was forgetting anything before leaving my household and then waiting for some sort of psychic voice to appear. And it would, but often I would ignore the voice because it just didn't make sense. It wasn't logical until I decided to play around and experiment with it a few times and saw that it was correct, which was really surprising to me. So I still don't always listen to that very same voice when I leave the house. But of course, I find out afterwards that it was correct. And when I hear or see the voice, it appears in my consciousness. But anyways, it comes in a whitish green color. And that's kind of like, I know that is the intuition voice that I was waiting for, or it's coming to tell me something. So that's just one crazy example. And I'm wondering if anyone else has tried things, maybe as kids, teenagers, before they were into remote viewing or even knew that, you know, psychic powers exist and what they have to say about that.
Well, to address the one thing, Ingo talked a lot about the basically what he called the psychic alerting system, that your biomind, your body is receiving so much information. Some people estimate 11 million bits per second. And that when the brain in high functioning people is at full operation, it's processing something like 60 bits a second. So a good portion of the brain is dedicated to sloughing off data that you don't need. Ingo gives one example, and I think it was maybe a 2002 talk, where he talks about if you're just walking along through, you know, like a brushy trail, and all of a sudden you just stop for no reason, you have no idea why you stopped, and then you look out and the next step was a cliff. So when we learn, I think this is part of the kinesthetic aspect, when you clay model, when you're writing, when you're working with clay or something, I think that brings that information system into play. It's just like right now, if I just said to you, become aware of your right foot. Your right foot was sending data to you this whole time until your attention was directed to it. It was unnecessary data. But as soon as someone says, become aware of your right foot, suddenly by intending to place your attention there, now you're aware of that data. So that psychic alerting type system, and it's not just for alerts. I mean, think of what 11 million bits of data per second might be trying to tell us. And then back to your question, did you do anything as a kid? I can't tell you how many hours I sat staring at stuff on the table or whatever, trying to make it move or tip over, and actually never got a single result on that. Anybody else?
Well, when I was a kid, I know this is going to sound dumb, but we were playing around with a Ouija board. Now, unlike all of the stories where you hear about poltergeists and terrifying situations, we were getting Old English poetry. It was amazing. It was a real I mean, formative experience to, in fact, when I was doing this, I was the note taker every time. You got your hands on that heart-shaped thing, and you get a letter, and you have to take your hands off it, pick up the pad, pick up the pen, write the letter, put those down, go back to the planchette, and it's a real rigmarole, and you get tired. I mean, your shoulders got really tired, but every once in a while I would look over at this pad, and I couldn't see a single word, even at the beginning, that looked like anything that I recognized. And we just went on for like about a half an hour or something like that until finally I was just too tired to carry on. And I told my partner that we were going to stop. And I scanned through all of the letters. There's no space on a Ouija board, okay? You got that, right? It's just a string of letters. So, I'm looking through this thing and I'm not seeing like a single recognizable word. So, except there was one in the middle, thou, Thou, kind of like an old-fashioned kind of a word. And I couldn't make it into a longer word. And so I drew vertical bars on that, and I started working forward and backward from that, and it worked. I was like, I couldn't believe it. It was like, oh my God, look at this word. This is an unusual word. This is another unusual word. And then finally, when I got through the whole thing, we still didn't know what it said. I mean, we had to go through this decoding. And so finally we started reading it. And that's when we realized it was using these archaic sort of spellings and words. And as I started getting in a little bit deeper, I realized there was a rhyming scheme going on here. This blew my head off. And so I don't know if that sort of fits into what you were asking, but that was sort of an amazing thing for me.
I had a Ouija board experience. One back, my wife and I were subletting our apartment, and she had a Ouija board that we played with and never really got any results out of it. But this couple came over to look at the apartment, saw the board in the corner against the wall, and said, "Oh, do you do that?" And we said, "Well, it doesn't work." And she said, "Oh, we'll show you." So they sat down, and I forgot the things we were talking about or asking the board the information, but I was really skeptical. So I says, "Okay, I know what to ask you." When it was my turn to ask a question, I said, "When was I born?" The only person who knew that was my wife, and she wasn't using the board at the time. It was this other couple, and it's going around around the board and it's saying "not born." So they look at each other and say "not born." What does that mean? And it said "brought into the world by cesarean." And a bingo.
I see David's hand up. David, is your question related to this latest round?
No, actually, this was my question was for you, and it's about the difference between the training and quals and PANs that you've had.
Oh, okay. Hang on to that for a second.
Sorry, Russell. Can I tell something? Can
Absolutely.
I tell something?
Yes.
Regarding Kiamitl, if I'm spelling correct his name, I have had some experience of looking and finding lost items in the childhood, sometimes for hours, sometimes for days. And in my family, and it is still in my family, this habit, we have a ritual with a little poem regarding the devils who's hiding things, and with 3 nuts and the glass and something like this. And in a matter of seconds or 1 minute, I find the thing. But it was something like 10 to 20 experience happened in my life. But it is like this, and in a matter of seconds or minutes, I found that item. I think it's amazing.
Yes, it is. Thank you for sharing.
Do you want me to chat? But I mean, so from the UK side of you, and Daz probably got a similar experience. It's not uncommon for kids of the 70s to probably grow up with tarot cards and all kind of strange things, or have somebody in the family that's kind of was heavily involved in that type of thing. And that was kind of my upbringing. And when I was quite in my teens, was kind of involved with a whole heap of different things. But one of the things that interestingly led me to remote viewing was I was doing at our medical practice a kind of a clinical study into intuition. So we basically way back got an EEG machine. We brought in psychics from all over. We brought in a variety of different people from age backgrounds and everything, and started looking at, could we determine what was the precursor to intuition and what created it? And we kind of looked at that study for quite about a year, and we concluded that we didn't really have anything statistically significant. And at that time, I was working with Pat Zaleski in New Zealand in the Golden Dawn, and I was about to be initiated into the Inner Order. So I was quite high up in that. And it was actually Pat that said to me, this is not for you. You maybe want to go and look at remote viewing. And that's what led me to Paul Smith. And the reason that happened was that Pat had said to me, you're looking for something that you're not going to find because you're looking for something you can reproduce that's systematical and something that's got a bit of science behind it. And that's kind of what led me to remote viewing. But my whole childhood and adolescence was brought up upon, I guess we call, I guess, a very European, UK occult style kind of upbringing, which was kind of just quite normal for me and kids around about my age. It was like somebody had a granny or an auntie or someone that did the tea leaves or did tarot cards or was at a psychic fair, or, you know, my whole kind of family was like that. And I've actually got my great-great-grand's original tarot cards, which is an old Marseille pack, which has been in our family for about 110 years now. That's the abbreviated crazy story, because I've seen some batshit crazy stuff. So that's a bit, but I know Dad's got a very colourful kind of similar background as well, which is kind of interesting.
How much do you want for those tarot cards, Andrew?
They're not for sale, but I do actually have a very old Mathers pack, the Rider pack that I own as well. I've actually got an extensive collection of old cards and OTO cards. I've got a Crowley set, I've got a Mathers set, I've got a couple of Marseille packs that are really old. I don't tend to touch any of the modern cards because I'm not really that keen on them. I've got some pretty old ones, but nothing really for sale.
Just curious.
Are there any other confessions of childhood psychics out there?
I have one. I don't know if anybody else has experienced this. Mine, I received a visitation when I was about 4 years of age, and it still shakes me now into my adult life. I can't disregard it in my thoughts. But I was visited by, sounds crazy, but it's absolutely not. A small creature came into my room when I was, I used to live in a public house. My mother and father were licensees of a pub. It's a big old building. And I remember I was lying in bed the one night and I saw a creature on the sideboard, and it absolutely scared the life out of me. And it jumped over across onto the bed, then up onto there was big curtains on the side, big old Victorian curtains. And he climbed up the curtains, and it was humanoid. It was not very nice looking. And then he would tease me, pulling the fabric of the curtains like that, and sort of in a goading, mocking way. I remember shouting for my parents, and then it just came up to me on the bed, and it said, I think it said something like, "You'll know," and that was the start for me. Growing up during my young early adulthood, things just kept coming, information. I would hear things, I would hear voices, I would hear about what was going to happen, what has happened. I'd start going up to people in the streets and telling them about themselves. I would have this urge, even when I was like 10, 11, 12, 13, to approach people. It was though I was directed to, and tell them things about people that they knew, or something that was going to happen, or something that did happen. So that was my introduction to it. But as an adult, it's quite haunting, because I don't know if anybody remembers, there was a television program, I think it was one of those sort of nightmare horror films that used to be on every night. I forgot the name of it. Like,
hello.
It was.
I'm just listening to.
It's one of those horror films that used to be in series, and it was of an aircraft, and there was a man inside an aircraft, and there was this sort of gremlin creature on the wing and the engine pulling it apart.
Twilight Zone.
That's the one. That is exactly the one. And that, when I saw that creature, that was the closest that I've ever seen to it, and it absolutely, oh my God, it really hit me. So that's where it started for me. And then, similar to what Daz did, I did the circuit at my local spiritual church, and and it just came so naturally, so freely. And then going into remote viewing, it was a whole different experience, because I had to try and suppress all the words that were coming into my mind as normal, what would normally happen, what I would normally experience, the visuals and the words and the pictures. I had to suppress those. I have to struggle to comply, if you know what I mean. I have to push everything out of the way. But that's my story, and it's not the nicest one, but it's got me where I am today.
Yeah. And it's interesting to me how many different paths that we've all followed. I'll tell you probably the weirdest story of intuition that's ever happened to me. I was 15. My best friend was probably 16 and a half, 17. And we used to love to go out ghost town hunting and gold panning. So we would drive all over the Western Washington and Eastern Washington mountains, looking for these old obscure ghost towns and things like that. And we had found about one. It was a little tiny, it was just like 3 or 4 buildings, a store, and a dock where boats used to come in to get supplies. So we didn't have enough gas money to get where we wanted. And my grandmother said, okay, why don't you clean out Grandpa's shed, and I'll give you $10 for gas. So we were in there cleaning out the shed, and a couple of hours. And I found a little package with a lock and keys in it. And it was brand new. My grandfather had never opened it. So I asked my grandma, I said, could I have this? And she said, oh, sure, no problem. So I threw it on the floorboard of the car in the back seat. We got the $10 and filled up with gas, went out. Now we had to go remote. We were way out on dirt roads at the point. Then we finally found this road. The grass was probably waist or chest high, and there was no sign of any vehicle traffic or anything like this. So we get to the end of it, right in the area where this little port ghost town was supposed to be, and there's a big metal gate, and there was a lock hanging on it, kind of rusty, and it was open. So being a stupid kid, I grabbed the lock to open the gate, and I threw the lock out over the trees down towards the beach or out towards the water, and and found the little trail. Sure enough, we went down, found some broken bottles and those old pilings and that kind of thing. So we were down the beach just poking around looking for stuff for probably an hour. Come back up because the sun's starting to set, and we need to get out, at least out of this long grassy road, back onto the dirt roads before it gets dark. So we go to start the car, just the car is not starting. And all of a sudden I look up, and standing about 20 feet in front of the hood of the car is literally a hermit, like long, dark, matted hair, beard. And he's sitting there and he's swinging our coil wire. And he says, you can have your coil wire back when you replace my lock. And I just stood there for a second and I go, oh my God. Opened the car door, got out, reached in the back seat, handed him that brand new lock that I had just gotten out of my grandma's shed. He gave us the coil wire back and we got out of there. And I think, what could even remotely be the chances statistically of having just 2 hours earlier, 3 hours earlier, acquired a brand new lock, thrown a lock away, and then, feel so terrified about being stuck in the woods with this guy and just happen to have a brand new lock to hand him. I'll never be able to explain that story, but it changed a lot of my thinking.
Hey, Russell, I would have lots and lots of stories like that, especially from my late grandmother. But one thing that I just, all of you brought back, has anyone heard of the shadow people? Sometimes you're walking and you turn out, you see like the shadow people moving. So that used to happen to me very often for a long time. Then it stopped, then it happened again, and now it's really sporadic. But for a long time I didn't share that until a few people started telling me, hey, did you saw that? And I was, yeah, I saw that. And a few times I brought it back and some people started saying, yeah, it has happened to us in the past. So has anyone else experienced something like that?
Yep.
Yeah. Jump in, Rick.
Yep. Basically, my experiences were when I was just reading a book in my previous house and there was nobody else there. And it always seemed to be in the periphery. It was never direct. It was always in the periphery. And I could see the dark shadow going across this light wall. And we had an archway and it would just disappear into the room there. And literally, the first time I saw it, I got up and I thought, there's somebody in the house. I went into the room and there was just nobody there. And I thought, this is a bit weird. And it sort of a little bit unnerved me in that respect, that I saw movement. I knew that I saw movement there because the inside of the house, there was no trees from windows creating shadows or anything like that. This was in an area that was just blank wall. And you question yourself, did I really see it? Yeah, I know I saw it. And I was looking all around the house. It was quite a sized house then. And I just had to pass it off. I'm thinking to myself, okay, this is a bit crazy. Let's just go back to the book. And then it happened again and again. And then I found out about these so-called shadow people. And yeah, I think from that day to this, I've probably had about half a dozen experiences with them.
Thanks for sharing, because exactly like that is what happened very often to me.
Yeah, I've had that experience before too. Not by anything like coming to me and revealing themselves, but me and some buddies about 10 years ago, we went to Waverly Hills Sanitarium in Louisville, Kentucky in the US. And it's known in America for being one of the most haunted buildings. So we went there specifically to see if we could see something paranormal. And so we saw shadow people. And it was interesting. It was this long corridor. And this whole facility, the reason it's so haunted is so many people died there. It's like a hospital. But if you sat and looked down this long corridor, it's like 150 feet long, maybe, with moonlight coming in. At the very end of it, once your eyes adjusted, you could see people like working, like what looked like doctors, I guess. Somebody looking down and looking at like a folder. You could see the outline of it. And so I thought, well, maybe it's not something like an afterlife I'm looking at. Maybe it's like timelines kind of overlapping or converging or something, and I'm seeing something from the past or something replayed. But a friend of mine, he volunteered to like walk down there and then walk back. And when he did, you could see like that, like a shadow person of a boy kind of sneaking behind him as he's walking and then moved in front of him. And it blew my mind that like the shadow person blocked my friend's view from me. So it can manipulate light to some degree, right? And so it wasn't just a shadow, it was a solid 3D mass. But yeah, it really changed my outlook on like the afterlife and everything.
I've spent a lot of time considering shadow people. I used to take my dogs out running in the middle of the night. I grew up near a golf course, and I discovered I had 2 black labs, and I discovered that as I would be out with them in the forest, I couldn't see them by looking directly at them. I could only see them from the side of my eye. So I kind of figured that the reason you only see, like I can't see everybody right now, but I assume everybody in this group that sees shadow people, you only see them from the side of your eyes, right? I think there's a biological reason that you only see that you do take in movement from the side of your eyes, and the front of your eyes is more for color and details. So movement is registered in your brain differently than detail. As so at night when I'm out running, that's when I tend to use the side of my eyes to see when I'm about to run into a tree, or if I'm just looking for my dogs or another person or whatever. So it's a function of the eyes, and then what the shadow people are in and of itself. That's always been a fun kind of concept to kind of guess. I guess, does everybody only see shadow people at night?
No.
No.
The daytime, I had them in the daytime, in the middle of the afternoon.
Yeah, daytime
in the
as well.
morning as well. So variety of times.
Yeah.
I mean, daytime, you know, in an ordinary lit house, it was just weird.
Can I just ask, do you think you're seeing like a ghost, or is it some sort of entity? Do you have
I
any?
can tell you something, you know, probably 99% of the times we're in the periphery of your vision, but once, and so it was also, you know, witnessed by other people, was right full frontal, let's call it that way, and didn't feel like something strange or out of the way, simply something they're conscious looking, monitoring, whatever. But yeah, it was just one time. Many people, different days, different times, same place, witnessed exactly the same thing. So it was the only full frontal experience.
The two that I saw, and this was in 1984, before the term even like became popular or anything. It's before like ghost TV shows and Art Bell and all that stuff came along. But it was they were standing at the end of my bed. I woke up middle of the night. There were, I think, 2 or 3 figures standing at the foot of my bed. And I remember there was light coming through the window, and I had bedposts, and I remember I seeing that the light was reflecting off, you know, like one side of the bedpost. But whatever these things were, there was no light reflecting off of them at all. It was like solid black, you know, and it wasn't out of the corner of my eyes. I was looking straight at them. And I remember looking at them for like 2 or 3 seconds, and then either passed out or went back to sleep. I don't know which. But it was, I remember I was definitely awake. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a, you know, lucid dream or anything like that.
So this doesn't sound like a ghost. This sounds more like some sort of, I don't know, other dimensional.
Yeah, it was really weird because there was like a feeling of, you know, being looked at, like you're being, you know, somebody consciously looking at you, not trying to hide or anything. Like I said, the only thing that was really interesting about that was the fact that it was like 1984. It was way before I even heard the term. It wasn't even mentioned in any of the books at the time period or anything. So it seemed to come about I'm did some research into it. It seemed to start around the 90s, I would think. Because you go back and look at literature before that, you really don't see mentions of shadow people or anything like that.
Well, I haven't heard of them until within the last 5 years, I would say. I've heard of ghosts and poltergeists and so on, but I've never heard of this. Yeah.
Okay, so is there any other responses? Daz, do you want to briefly address, is your name is pronounced Kiao? Kiao's question about templates to help people learn remote viewing.
I can do. I wouldn't advise it long term, but there are people that have tried it for a short period of time just to see if they have a basic bit of RV capability. And in fact, I literally just this week, past week actually, created a 4-page PDF template system of a simple 3-stage process in a really simple format for the crypto viewing people to use. But I don't know if it's going to get approved for them to use. So I could maybe distribute that, and it comes with a video that I created on how to do it as well. But it's literally, yeah, there are some people that have created template systems. I know TRV did it at Dames. And I do think that it is okay to just test to see if you have a minimum capability if you're new to remote viewing, but I wouldn't use it past 5 or 10 quick experiments. I think once you find you had a bit of ability, you need to maybe find a bit more of a stable method, one that doesn't support you so much with word sheets that you can pick words from and stuff like that. But I think they are good just to see if you have a little bit of interest in it, because like the rest of us, you end up spending many years and much amounts of money investigating this, so it's worth seeing if you can do it first.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Paul.
I appreciate Daz's hesitancy on the template thing. I think Ingo would be really kind of aghast about that whole idea. The reason being, of course, that a template actually compresses you into a certain way of doing things, and essentially tends to circumscribe the kind of responses you might come up with. A certain legendary practitioner in the field, early adopter in terms of online learning, or at least digital learning, was all about templates. And I just was horrified to see that, because particularly this individual had lists of things, like when you're in stage 2s, the sensories, a list of sensories. And at least for a while, the counsel was only use words on this list, right? That's just so circumscribing, that's so limiting. And that's not the idea here. The idea is to allow free form, free flow conceptualization come in. Now, of course, CRV has a structure, it has a format, but the idea of that is just to provide an area where you can then bring out that stuff, and in the right order that it comes in through the standard format of human consciousness. In my classes, I teach folks, I say, essentially, in fact, this might even come from Ingo. The idea is that the structure of CRV actually maps the way the signal unfolds into consciousness. So there's a certain way that we perceive things, starting from the very basic initial impressions, as it unfolds and develops and gets more and more complex as we delve deeper into the signal. And CRV is designed to essentially mimic, or at least map, as I said, map that, or follow that format. And when you start making templates and stuff, you just really kind of, the German is beschränkt, and I'm trying to think of, I guess, limit or whatever. Now, I do have to say, some of you have this set of mine, this DVD training set, and there are templates in here, okay? I had lots of go-arounds with the people who produced this thing, and they finally convinced me that, at least to start, and this is kind of where Daz was going with this, right? To start out particularly and again, this is also a limited kind of a format, trying to do it in the digital serial linear digital approach. To start out, it really is helpful if you give people a format in that setting. But I don't, if anybody starts putting extra lines on their page or trying to outline things or whatever in my classes, they are gently corrected. Is that right, Russell? Am I saying that right? Gently corrected.
Well,
anyway, that's my 10 cents on this.
I do sometimes pride myself for making a good Mormon gentleman pound the desk. So, okay. I will say one thing, Kiao, from a direct experience, both in my own case and then watching Nancy and Catherine convert from TRV to CRV. And they did do it through Paul's DVD, which I believe is still down from its original $299 price down to $99. And if you're interested in that, because the producer is having a sale on all their products, if you're interested in that, post in the remote viewing, remote perception thing, and I'll get you a link. When I was trained on the template.
Hold that thought just for a second, since you brought that up. Just to let people know, because they get confused about this, I don't sell this thing. There's essentially a publishing company that commissioned me to create the course, and then they're the ones that market it. They're the ones that sell it. They're the ones that decide how much it's going to be. I have absolutely no say in that. So just to let you know.
Yeah.
On that point, Russell, Paul, sorry, is there any plans to do some more filming and complete the rest of the stages for some more DVDs?
So the original people that owned it have sold it to another guy. And I've been in discussions with him. He would like to do it, the follow-on stage is kind of a streaming sort of an offering, or maybe a hybrid between streaming and maybe some live lectures or something. It's very unfleshed out right now, but there's at least some thoughts about doing that.
Okay, good.
On the when I learned the template method versus when I broke free of that, starting in Paul's basic class, it was a world of difference. Both Nancy and Catherine, who had been trained through TRV templates, when they got unleashed with a blank piece of paper and the instruction, like Paul says, Ingo didn't arbitrarily come up with things. He had scientists, psychologists, physicists, and they literally, how is information processed? They didn't just impose something on the perceptual process. They looked, how did it flow? How did it work naturally? And then they built the structure around that. So when Nancy and Catherine got free of those templates, in specific, Catherine was always good, but in specific, Nancy's remote viewing probably tripled in accuracy just from that simple flow. Also on our remote viewing, remote perception group, there is now in the announcements a blog that Paul did with a great series of resources from free to the full meal deal course, which you go to Cedar City and take in person. And in there, one of the things is just a video on how to do a simple remote viewing session. So if you haven't seen that video, I would definitely suggest that, or let the person you're helping watch it. So does that answer your questions? Okay, great. David has patiently had his little yellow hand up here for quite some time. Why don't you fire away, Dave?
In fact, I think I saw him nodding off there. He'd waited so long.
My question, Russell, is, I know you went through Paul's whole program. I know he works on a gradient and he works you, slowly up to these more advanced targets. I know you've had some, training with people in his class. But then when you go to Pam's class and you're dealing with, even in the class portion of it, when you're dealing with, you know, people that have passed, or there may be violent death, stuff like that. Can you tell me some of the differences as far as, I know you guys start with a picture in that class and stuff like that. So could you tell me some of the differences as far as the approach to a target like that, and with like an emotional charge like that of a target?
Yeah, sure. Pam has separate toolkits for herself. She uses a version, kind of a hybrid version of remote viewing when she teaches that, uses traditional psychic modality, mediumship. So when you take Pam's class, she recognizes whatever approach you want to use. So for instance, for me, she accommodated the fact that I wanted to use CRV. When I started that course, because of my career in emergency medicine and firefighting, I honestly thought I would have no problem perceiving traumatic or negative things. And I was mistaken. This first occurred to me on a day where I was doing a project with her, where it was a beautiful sunny day. I felt great. And all of a sudden I noticed myself not wanting to look, not wanting to see, resistance within myself. And it was like, I said to myself, I don't want to ruin my day right now and perceive unpleasant things. So it surprised me to see that resistance. I thought that I had overcome all that in the real world, but in the psychic world, apparently I still just didn't want to see that on that particular day. Now, we've discussed this before, Paul teaches you over the courses a gradient of accommodating aesthetic impact, how to become aware of it, how to, dissolve it is the term that I use. There were a couple of times in the training course, one in particular with Bill Ray, where I literally started crying. And so I'm embarrassed. I'm sitting here in front of, a man's man, a professional remote viewer. And and he said, hey, it's okay. We've all done it. Just set your pen down, write down AI break, stand up. If you need to go to the bathroom, go outside, get some fresh air. So when he brought me through all of that, then it was like all the emotion had cleared, and thus, in my opinion, the filters were gone. I'm not going to be interpreting everything through the grief that I felt for that period of time. Pam has her own unique modalities in terms of how to look at a crime scene, how to deal with the emotion, and she does it all the time. She has to keep herself clear of that to move on to the next case that she's working. In regard to the biggest benefit for me as a CRV preferred practitioner was the front loading. Oh my God. After going through all the blind training, everything, I see a picture and it says, basically dead or alive. So now I'm forced into a binary choice, and I look at the guy's jacket and I see a little, ski lodge emblem, and then I see a map of California in the background, and my mind is California, skiing, blah, blah, blah. He's probably outdoorsy, this, that, maybe he's a hiker, maybe, all in 3 seconds before I can even put my name on the form. So working through that was great. And it ultimately came down to this. Yes, I've seen a picture. I am now front loaded, which is not CRV tradition, but in psychic detective work, it's a reality. It's what the police do. They give you a photo or some, leading information. So the day the light bulb came on, even though I've seen it, and actually I'll have to, as much as I don't want to give Paul credit for this, he was doing a little talk and he said, even though you're front loaded, you don't know. You still don't know. You don't know what the police want to know. So as soon as I was able to use that picture effectively as a target reference number to bounce to whatever the real situation is, but I, for a while in brackets, wrote down before I even took the ideogram, I just simply wrote in big, bold letters with an exclamation mark. I don't know. I've seen a picture. I've been told this or that. And once I resigned myself back to the fact, I don't know, it was almost like I had been front loaded and then made myself blind again. And once I did that, once I was able to disconnect from that front loading and just put myself in a I don't know state, then those types of sessions became more successful for me. Does that answer your question?
Yep. Thanks, Russ.
Okay, you're welcome, Dave. Anybody else got a topic, a story, anything?
Hey, Russell, just quick question. I had it on one of the Facebook groups, but also would like to hear anyone or Paul or address whether there's any difference when using CRV by using a Western language versus an Eastern language. And the reason I'm asking this is not only because probably you write it on the other way around or up and down, or whatever, but cognitive wise, it's a completely different way of expressing or communicating yourself. You know, we may have, you know, as Daz said, a little bit of a wiggly scripture when you write it by hand, probably like Dr. Wise, as you know, but you can still make it out, you know, you can even alter a few letters and you will understand it. But my experience, especially with Chinese and Japanese, is that, you know, if you don't pronounce it correctly, if you don't write it correctly, even a little bit of the symbol, you will get it all wrong. So how does that impact a CRV session? Is it possible to do it that way? Just general curiosity.
Are you still out there, Paul? Okay, I don't know if Paul's still out there. Is anybody else here multilingual or having? Okay, so I'll just throw out a theory that has absolutely no substantial evidence to support it, but it's something I've come to observe myself. There's, if you look at what a concept is, a concept just seems to be a knowingness. A thought is a description of that knowingness, and then the words themselves are symbol for the thought, for the concept or the knowingness. I think in certain cases, and I've seen this myself, in what I would call telepathic dialogues, how does, you know, let's say there's some being on another planet, this, that, or the other, how can we understand each other? And you go and think about the old Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the Babelfish. There's something, I believe, that if the concept jumps over from one being to another, you know that concept, and then your own thought and then your own language takes place, and then you write out the symbol. So within that structure for myself, Tom McNear had an example where he started getting phonetics on an Egyptian name. Don was talking earlier about words popping out that obviously he's heard or familiar with, but doesn't frequently use. And I've even heard David say this too, and I find it incredibly exciting. When I write down a word that is not in my vocabulary on a regular basis or surprises me, that's exciting to me, because right then I feel like, oh, you know, this isn't coming from me. This is coming from the target. So hopefully that'll kind of put it in a little context. I only speak English. I know Paul will still get German words in some of his sessions, but I don't know how to describe that to you.
That's a very good question. Actually, I've been trying to research how to experiment for that myself recently, figuring out not just limited to characters and language, but people's way of seeing through culture, ethnicity, and background, all sorts of things. There are so many things that you can see in life in general that everyone will see completely differently. I recently had a nice conversation about the parable of the elephant, where you have these three blind men standing around the elephant, and each one touches a different part of it and describes something different. The one with the tusk says it's a snake, and so on. I think it probably can have a profound impact on remote viewing and what results you turn in if your background will cause you to see a snake as a particular thing, or you see anything as a particular thing. Some people will look at a snake and think evil. This is an evil being. It is a living representation of Satan. And then you'll have other people that say, well, the snake sheds its skin and it has this form of renewal. And so everybody looks at things very differently. And I think that one of the important things about going into remote viewing is to have some sense of how you see things and what bias you might put on something that could be as simple as a rock. So that's a very good question, that to actually transfer understanding from one person to another, like Russell was saying, that is a huge, people can't even do that when they speak the same language. Two people speaking English can completely misunderstand each other just because of how words are perceived. And so language in and of itself is horribly limited in that. So remote viewing, I think, would have to be affected depending on what the target is. But if the target was maybe something as simple as a rock, then maybe everybody could get that right. But imagine a target as complicated as, what political thing do you think will happen? Or what do you think this will be? Well, everybody will have a completely different view of things like that. And I think that's why sometimes remote viewing results can have so much variation when you're looking at something that seems black and white, when it really isn't black and white at all. It's not binary.
Great points. Paul, did you see the question? Oh, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, it's more a neurophysiological thing. So if you think of the conscious aspect of writing, and you think of kana, and you think of kind of katakana, and you think of kind of, it's for, so if you're fluent in it and it's your native language, there'll be a certain fluency to your writing. Whereas obviously if you're a Westerner trying to learn, there's a much more kind of process of kind of determining and kind of trial and error with kind of writing the kind of kana. So when I've looked at the kind of neurophysiology of things like this, I've not found there to be anything in the research that would suggest that because the Chinese and Japanese language is more pictorial, that it's got any more of a difference between left and right hemisphere activation. So I'm not convinced on that. I think I think there's probably a percentage of it, but I don't think it's as determinant as that. I think there's much more to do with kind of the process of learning, cognition, and neurophysiology than anything else. I know two Japanese people that remote view, and I wouldn't say that it deters or it changes their process, especially going through the stages. So I'm not sure about that. Paul will have a much better answer on the neurophysiology behind it.
Yeah, Paul, did you see the question addressed to you?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah. So I actually had a comment about Blind Men and the Elephant, so I'll come back to that since Andrew is moving in this direction. So I kind of agree with that. I mean, language is language. And even though some of the Asian languages tend to be more pictographic in the way they're represented, they still pretty much activate the same parts of the brain that any language does. I've had people push back and say, well, so in CRV, the way Ingo taught it was you start on this side and you work across. So left to right, and then down the page, and then left to right, and so on like that. And they go, well, why is that? Why not the other way? I said, because that's how we do English, right? That's the only reason. It's a convention. I said, if we were in the Middle East, we'd be going, from right to left. If we're in Japan, depending on which form of language you use, you might be going down, up, down, up, down, up. It just has to do with what your particular linguistic representation is in your particular culture. But that doesn't mean that the underlying process that isn't pretty much the same. One interesting thing would be to know how ASL, American Sign Language, might interact here. There might be something kind of unique or interesting with that, but there's been no research on that. So anyway, that's what I'd say. I think Andrew's pretty much got it. The Blind Man and the Elephant. and this is kind of a sidebar to what Fabian was saying, but that illustration is so awesome when it comes to helping people understand analytical overlay, how the brain works on limited data. I've used it off and on throughout the years with my students, and it's just, if you think about it, the one guy gets a hold of the elephant's tail and he says, well, the elephant is a snake. Well, no, the elephant isn't a snake. You're only reacting from a part of the data, right, in that. And then your analytic part of your brain extrapolates from that to what you know, to what you think you know, to missing the rest of the elephant. And that's often the case. This is a kind of a mixture between analytical overlay and what we also call doorknobbing. Doorknobbing is this term that Skip Atwater invented. And it said essentially, when the whole house is the target and all you get is the doorknob, right? Happens all the time. Viewers will get pieces of a target and assume that's the whole target, when no, there's a whole house there. In this case, a whole elephant. And that illustration is just perfect to help people understand what analytical overlay actually amounts to. It's taking a piece of the target and then extrapolating into something it's not. So anyway, there you go.
And one thing I find interesting, that's been my favorite parable for years, is I was talking with Gail Husick, and when she was just kind of describing how, let's say you have a team of 6 viewers on a project, how one viewer gets, and when she weaves this tapestry together, so for instance, it's like the 6 blind people communicating about the elephant. If they had gotten together or composed their individual perspectives, they would have ended up with an elephant. So I think that's kind of a neat thing. Now, Paul, one thing I've always wanted to ask you, when you were teaching that large Russian group, how was the language situation there in reference to Pablo's question?
In terms of just the process of teaching the class, is that what you mean?
Well, maybe conceptual differences, or did language become a barrier in their sessions?
Language was only a barrier in terms of presenting the information. They had a really good translator there, but that always doubles the amount of time you spend. So that's the only barrier it was. In the actual execution sessions, I didn't really see any difference between that and English speakers.
Okay.
Some of them really did some amazing stuff. Some of those Russians, just incredible success. Others struggled, which is kind of typical. You get some people who struggle and some people who do really well. That was an awesome experience, I have to say. It was awesome.
And one thing too, Fabian, kind of along the lines of what you were adding, when we go to China, or when Chinese people come here, or essentially anywhere, we do put our signs in pictures. So if you show a picture of a trash can with a red X or a red line through it, that means one thing. Or if so somehow images are essentially universal. And when I go to the sketching phase of what I do now start to feel more relaxed than when I'm in a verbal phase. So I don't know if pictures are able to transcend these possible language barriers more than the language.
May I throw something out there quickly?
Yes, David. Welcome.
Hey, I was a bit late to the party tonight.
I know. We're going to send you a tardy note later.
Oh, again. In the magical tradition where people are going very off-piste and are doing astral projection and talking to demons and all the stuff they do, one of the early educational steps for that is in the Western mystery tradition is getting very, very familiar with tarot, not because of reading fortunes and things, but because the cards are claimed to be a universal archetypal language through the visual symbolism, and that I it's that kind of chimes with the pictographic and ambiguous nature of maybe Mandarin or something, where words mean very different things depending on how they're constructed. And there is this theory, which I really don't know whether I believe. I haven't kind of gone down this path, which is that there is a universal subconscious archetypal language. I think it was you, Russell, was saying that words are just symbols. We have this knowing, there is the concept, there is the thingness about a thing, and we stick labels on it, and we might get the labels wrong, but the knowing is the same. And when we communicate telepathically, or maybe all remote viewing data, we're kind of trying to stick labels and find which one fits. And in the magical tradition, the idea is you learn this tarot thing, and it kind of gets you familiar with this allegedly universal symbolism. I don't know how good a vocabulary the 72 or however many tarot cards there are is, but I just thought I'd throw that out there to add to it. It's a big topic.
Well, one thing I'd like to ask Paul, if you don't mind elaborating. One of the things when we were getting some instruction on remote viewing people was to get pictures of, instead of saying, what do you do, basically, or expecting a language response, that there was pictures. They could show you a picture of what they were doing.
Oh, no, yeah, not a picture. The idea is that they just demonstrate for you.
Oh, okay, but well, I mean, you receive that as an image.
It might not be an image. It may just be a kind of a knowing.
Okay.
A perceptual experience of some kind. Yeah.
Yeah. So they wouldn't answer, I'm a carpenter. You might get a sense of a hammer and wood.
Right. Or you see them pounding on something or whatever. Right. Mm-hmm. You might get the impression of carpenter too. I mean, who knows how it comes through? It can happen differently for different people, and it can happen differently for the same person depending on the setting, for the target, the session, or how tuned in they are. So there's not a hard and fast way how it manifests, I suppose you'd say.
Paul, do you think that is like people putting labels on the knowing? If somebody might see an image, or somebody might feel the impact of the carpenter's hammer, or is that like that same interpretive layer as words?
Well, that can happen, and of course that's an analytical function, right? So particularly earlier in a session, if you have the impression of somebody hitting something and you say, oh, it's a carpenter, that's almost always wrong. Right. So you call it an AOL. Later on in the session, those kind of impressions, because the bandwidth is bigger and you have more information throughput, so to speak in technical terms, those points, those kind of conclusions often are correct. So and it may be an analytical result even, although it's informed by perception, much more heavily informed by perception. So so you basically you understand it properly. It's just that if you're deep enough into session, it becomes less of an issue in terms of it being noise as opposed to data. I do notice there's a question here from somebody.
Rid.
Oh, it's from Rid. Want to know how you prevent doorknobbing? Well, there's two things to keep in mind here. First of all, just because you get one thing doesn't mean there's not something else there. Right. People, and it happens, students will often, they'll feel insecure. So they'll be homing in on something and they feel very confident that they're getting that correct. And they're afraid to stray away from that because they don't want to take the chance on being wrong about something else while they're being right about this thing. Right. And so what you as a remote viewer have to understand is that just because you're getting things that are right about one thing, doesn't mean that there's not a lot more there. You should always explore the vicinity. Okay, so that's the encouraging to go out. But then there's the other side of it, which is because you know that you need to explore, go out and see if there's anything else, oftentimes your analytic mind will build stuff, invent stuff that's there. Okay, well, maybe there's something else out here. I'll go look. Well, I know I should be finding something here, so I'll just make something up. Right now, you're not thinking of this. That's your, the behind the scenes processes going on, and so you have to be careful not to assume that all what you've got is all there is, But you also have to be careful not to assume that just because you're going out to explore doesn't necessarily mean there is something to be found. You have to kind of balance those two things out. I hope this is making sense for you.
Did that answer your question, Rid?
Is Rid still here?
Don't know. Anyway, if it did answer your question, yes, he just typed in yes.
Okay.
I
see.
Can I ask Paul a question, please?
Absolutely.
Well, I noticed
your bandwidth just shrank. I can't.
Your video froze, Demi.
I will read from it. Okay. No.
It's okay.
It's gonna come. It's okay. Okay. So a correct perception, sometimes not at all of the people at the target level. Sometimes the target is a person or a personality, and it is as they are invisible to me. So how can I make this problem to be overcome? Sometimes I feel the energy of the person, but only that and not the person itself. So what can I do about it?
Well, that's a tough one. First off, this is going to sound trite, but really, do a lot of people, right? The more you do it, the more confidence you'll develop, and the more experience you'll learn in overcoming the issues, right? Just because you don't succeed on one, try it again. Not necessarily right away. Give yourself a break or whatever, right? But try it again, and just keep working on it. There's a lot of trial and error here. People can give you some guidance and some direction, and I do my best with that myself. But ultimately, it's like any knowing how skill. So there's two kinds of knowledge, and it's oftentimes represented as knowing that, which is factual knowledge, and knowing how, which is behavioral knowledge, so to speak, or skills, right? And the knowing that's easy to convey. You can tell people all kinds of facts. That's easy to convey objectively. But the knowing how is the trick, like trying to learn how to ride a bike. You can get a lot of instruction on how to ride a bike. You can even have somebody there with you and pushing along. But at a certain point, you just got to fall off a number of times, and then you get it, right? And that will be the case with doing people. And I don't know what the circumstances are. If you know you're doing a person, if you know that's the target, or if you are given just an arbitrary coordinate, and the person intends for you, the tasker intends for you to describe a person, but you don't know that when you start into it. What's usually the case with you? I think you froze again. Okay. Oh no, there you're unfroze.
So jeez.
Yeah.
Sometimes I come up to a group of people, and I cannot go to everybody, to each one to say about how are they looking, what are they thinking. I perceive the energy about around them, but only that they are marching, they are serious, they are something like this, but not particularly one person. And if I have a person in my target, I can perceive everything around it and not the person per se.
Okay, well,
So
okay, gotcha. So you're talking about in a remote viewing session, but then are you aware from the start that this person is your target?
I'm not front loaded.
Okay, so you just have a session, you're doing the session. In the session, you encounter a person, and then you have a hard time dealing with them. Well, okay, so it's hard to say what's going on there. And I don't know if I have any much to offer you, but there are a couple of possibilities, right? So one is, I think it is possible for a person to block perception from others, but usually they don't know they're being remote viewed. So this may be just a kind of a block that they've adopted, not intentionally, just it's hard to get at them, right? So the other possibility is that you've got a block, that somehow you're feeling reluctant to address this person. Now that can come from a couple of things. One is that you may feel like you're intruding on their privacy, and that does get in the way sometimes, right? The other thing is you may have, I don't know about you, but this happens to folks, even me sometimes, you may have a lack of confidence, and because you feel like, oh, this is something I'm not sure I'm going to be able to do, then you can't do it, right? And that's where the doing it a lot comes in. You get to the point where you don't care whether you can do it or not, you just do it, right? It's kind of a tedious approach, and it takes time and energy, but that's the nature of any complex human skill. You know, if you think about it, nobody starts off playing the violin in a concert at the beginning. They spend hours and hours and days and months and years getting there. And remote viewing is a complex human skill. In some ways, more complex than even playing a musical instrument because it's not as concrete. So anyway, that's probably, I speak a bunch of nonsense, but whatever.
Does that answer?
Thank you.
Does that answer?
Thank you very much. Yes,
Okay.
yes, of course,
Good.
very much.
Paul, I've got a
And
question.
hold on one second. Who said that?
Me.
Me. Who's me?
Andrew.
Oh, Andrew. Okay, go for it.
So I was kind of interested, was there any environmental research done back before me looking at maybe heat, cold, or even like sleep deprivation on the kind of elements that kind of cognitive function? Because when you bring into hypothermia, it's quite interesting when you do studies on it.
Mm-hmm.
You can see that especially special forces operators, is they're going to kind of hypothermic state, that kind of their kind of locus of control and focus really narrows in, and you can get some really nice, interesting results out of them. You know, you make them do complex math tasks and stuff. I was kind of wondering whether anything, obviously,
We never went in those directions. And of course, Fort Meade's main thing wasn't research anyway. That was kind of a ancillary thing we did, was research. Mostly we're doing operational or operationally related stuff. SRI and then later SAIC, their focus was research, but I don't believe they did any of that then either. So I don't know. This sounds like it could be an interesting work.
I think there's a lot of interesting research projects. We need to get something up and going fairly soon. I think I've got
Andrew, are you volunteering to sit in an ice bath and remote view for us?
I can get into university environmental chamber and do all sorts of crazy things. That's not a problem.
Okay.
That is a good point. That is a good point. If you've ever tried to remote view hurt, anybody who is in pain or anything like that, I've found that I've had different experiences when I'm in some kind of pain that I'm trying to ignore.
Well, the thing to know when you're remote viewing, that's what we call a personal inclemency. That was Ingo's term for it, personal inclemency. And a personal inclemency can be a physical thing, like a pain. It can be an emotional thing, like you're going through a divorce, like I did back then. It can be a worry or an aggravation, like you're getting audited by the IRS or something. You know, it can be almost anything. And in fact, I have remote viewed under at least mild pain considerations, and with PIs, with personal inclemencies, the idea is you set them aside. In fact, that's the term Lynn Buchanan adopted to replace the personal inclemency term, is a set aside, right? And in fact, I've attest to this, that almost anything that is bothering you, from anywhere from a little pain to a lot of pain to high emotional stress to anything, if you learn the process of setting it aside temporarily, and there's lots of techniques and things like this that are addressed in the human potentials movement. I mean, the Monroe Institute, Monroe does an energy conversion box, right, which is the same kind of thing. If you learn to set it aside and honestly set it aside during the course of the session, it actually very rarely can hamper your results. Usually you can, in fact, my best ever session was done when I was right in the middle of a divorce. So, and things were pretty ugly. So I can tell you, it's definitely doable from that perspective. Now, I don't know if that addressed directly what you're talking about, Fabian, but that's what I thought of when you said it. So.
Rid had thrown out, I'm sorry, Fabian, were you going to say something?
I guess I could say something brief, not to take up all the time, but yeah, after I was in a bike accident, and my perception was ridiculously stronger. Just to throw out an easy word, it wasn't pleasant, but things were very, very different in a very noticeable way.
So do you mean during the accident, in the immediate aftermath, or when you were trying to be psychic after the accident?
It was after the accident, just trying to relax. Yeah. A while afterwards, I just wanted to get back to my regular thing, and I found that things were very different. And I don't know if it was because I was trying to ignore the pain of a terribly scraped knee, or what. But I do remember that being a very pronounced change in how my mind worked and perceived everything.
You know, my thought about that is that pain, of course, is a great focuser, right? It really brings you into the present.
Mm-hmm.
And it also tends to narrow your attention down a bit, even after the fact like this, when it's just aching, whatever, it tends to keep you in the present and the now. So maybe that played a role. I don't know, just speculation. So
there is this
I would
idea
be speculating too.
Sorry, Fabian. Go on.
Go ahead.
Oh, the idea of trauma causing increased psychic functioning as like a self-defense thing, you know, that the size sense becomes more active when it's trying to protect you from stuff. So if you have a traumatic experience, not necessarily physical like your bike crash, Fabian, but you know, it could be an emotionally difficult time or something, that the psi thing wakes up and goes, all right, how can I get you out of this situation?
Mm-hmm.
Which, I mean, that was kind of my personal experience. I would still think that everything was made of atoms and molecules and billiard balls if that hadn't happened to me. But I don't really know the scientific basis for it. But it seems to be an effect. I've read a lot of people who have similar experiences.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Rid had also kind of put in a follow-up question, and I wanted to supplement one half of what Paul said, because people don't think about that. We're used to, you know, looking at a session and maybe not getting everything that's there. Gail has what she calls operational skill building training, and when we're not doing operational sessions, she'll put these sessions out there for us. So without giving away the target, I'll just use an analogy. Let's imagine that, I mean, you get something really small. Let's just say one part of something sitting on the table about the size of your thumb or the palm of your hand. When I got my first target like that, I started out very accurate on that, but I knew that couldn't be it. So I jokingly call it house knobbing. I built a house around this thing. And when I saw what it was, it you know, obviously it was very frustrating, but I just couldn't accept that. Well, it just can't be just this little tiny thing, but yet it was. So that moves you towards the idea of just quit expecting or judging a present session by a past session. All right. Oh, wait, here's another question. Okay. Let me see. Okay. All right. So this is a question to anybody, presumably instructors or people with the knowledge of these two people. Does anyone know if Russell Targ or Hal Puthoff follow any particular modality of RV or intuition?
Answer is no. In fact, Russell is just essentially rejects any idea of needing any kind of a methodology or whatever. He's very much what I call a generic follower or proponent of what I call generic remote viewing, which is whatever works for you, essentially. And he basically just, I mean, he does when he teaches remote viewing, all he teaches these days is you close your eyes, you visualize what the target is, and then you sketch and verbalize. So just the very basic. In fact, kind of like that video that Russell mentioned before, my how to do a simple remote viewing. That's based on things that Russell and I have talked about over the years about how to do just the get people started kind of an approach. So that's all Russell does. In fact, when you talk about CRV, for example, with him, he kind of shakes his head and he doesn't want anything to do with it. Hal, I should also say, I don't think Russell actually does remote viewing. I think he introduces it to people. He talks about it. In the past, he's done it a couple of times. One time he did it at SRI in one of their experiments only because the actual remote viewer didn't show up. And he was a bit surprised because he hadn't really had a lot of experience remote viewing himself, and it worked. So that was quite a reassurance to him. But Hal also very rarely ever did remote viewing. I'm sure doesn't do anymore. And there was a reason for that, was because the contracting folks at DoD said, the one thing we need is you to preserve your objectivity. And we believe that if you try to do remote viewing yourself, then you will lose your objectivity, and we don't want to have that happen. Now, he did do some, when Ingo was developing CRV, the two of them worked together on it. He did some stage 1 to stage 2 CRVs. I never got into stage 3. Somewhat proof of principle, and partly because Ingo needed a victim, a subject to work on in terms of development, and see what worked and what didn't work. And other folks did as well. Let me think who, well, a lot, Jacques Vallée did that similar things with Ingo there. I've got to see all the sessions I've seen.
I'm going to interrupt for 1 second. It sounds like somebody has construction going on, and I cannot. Oh, that's you?
No, that's at my house. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I couldn't find an open.
Part of my distraction is that we were having a bathroom remodel, and the contractors keep coming in and going out.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Anyway, that's enough. I'm going on and on and on here, but you get the idea. The answer is essentially no, they don't have a particularly mode they do. But if Hal was going to do it, once he brushed up on it again, I think he'd probably do CRV. So
I have a question.
Go for it.
Russell's got the answer. No.
Actually, I think, Paul, this one's going to be for you, because I got this from your book. All right.
Oh, which book?
Psychic Spies, is it? Or
there's Reading the Enemy's Mind, and then
it's whatever one you recommended I get. All right, it was it's the one about the history of
that's probably Reading the Enemy's Mind. Is that the big fat one?
Yeah,
that's it.
All right, so the deal is everything in there, it was beautifully explained, except there was one thing that really sort of caught me off guard and kept me wondering. It was like,
that was just a test to make sure you really read it.
You were being asked to by Ingo, I think, to write out the what's the right word here? It was like you had these like preliminary like strategy sessions or something like that. Theory. You had to write out the theory or something like that, or teach the theory or something like that.
An essay? You're talking about essays?
Yeah. Is that what it was? I think you were writing something, and then you had to like either teach somebody or read it or something like that. Could you say a few words about what that was all about?
Well, one thing, Ingo, when we're learning the basics of it, before we actually put it into practice, he would have us, he'd give us lectures, present lectures, and there's discussion involved as well, but mostly lectures. And then we were done with a certain block of lecture, then he would make us write an essay on what we had learned. And so should I shut my door, Russell? Is that really, that drill making a lot of racket?
It's up to you, Paul.
Well, it depends on what you can hear on your end. It's,
we hear it. Yeah, we hear
I'll
it.
shut the door. It'll help some. Just a second.
Sure.
Okay, so it's really actually a very legitimate teaching methodology. It's very tedious. My students whine about it all the time, but a lot of research on the psychology of learning these days shows that you need to actually recall and recapitulate what you've heard, what you've learned. And it's a very powerful way of cementing that in your subconscious into your whole learning mechanism. And so I continue to insist to do it, even though the people don't like to, but it's really, really valuable. drudgery, but valuable nonetheless. So he would make us write these essays. And he's a little bit was stricter than I am about it. You write the essay, you turn it in. If it wasn't quite right, he'd say, no, this isn't quite right. Go back, look through your notes and make it right. You know, and he wouldn't tell you what was wrong with it to start with. After 2 or 3 iterations of that, then finally he'd say, okay, well, this, and this, and then you sort it out and get it right. And I'll tell you, it is a very thorough way of learning something, but yeah, it was painful.
So you had written notes, and then you would do a remote viewing session, and then you would write an essay that
No. That was all strictly with the learning part of it, the theory part, you know, the process part, where he would explain how it worked. Well, first of all, we discuss the terminology, we discuss the doctrine of it, you know, the whole process and everything. We'd write an essay about that. Then we'd put it into practice by doing sessions or whatever.
Okay, all right, got it. No, it sounds like a really interesting technique, you know, a learning technique, reinforcing it all and everything. So
I'll do a show and tell here for you, Don. So when you are in the class, Paul has slideshows, and you look at those, you take notes, then he gives his verbal supplement to the slideshow. So you get those notes. Then when you go home at the end of the day, you get a homework assignment. It might be some 60-second sketches of you know, what's going on in your hotel room. But when you get to the essay, so just you can see, just kind of get an idea. So these essays can be pretty substantial. I X'd out that side. And like Paul says, it's definitely not a favorite of the student, but I can't tell you how many times sitting at the hotel room later, rereading your notes and putting them into a essay, little light bulbs go. You're like,
no, I get it.
Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense.
So when you get these, and then you have a basically kind of a self-report on how the class was, what you learned, that you also turn in. And that for me was part of what I loved. I love, military, fire department kind of structured academy type things. So I found them very, very useful, and the full range of comments in red ink. I won't try to relate to you here, but if you private video with me, I'll tell some more.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, both of you.
Yeah. And I have to go back to something funny. When I first announced in the groups, Daz's group, that I was going to be going to Paul's basic course, I really had not that much communication, specifically in private, with Daz. And I remember he just sent 3 words to me: be prepared to work. And I was like, yeah, you don't know me. And I will tell you, the courses are incredibly challenging. And if they didn't break down some of these little walls and blocks and barriers, you're not going to get to where you want to be. So it's very well designed, very well structured. Even the fact that those are on pink paper is part of an Ingo tradition. The closest, in my opinion, that you're going to come in today's CRV world to a direct translation of how Ingo taught to the opportunity to experience that for yourself is going to be through Paul.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
I didn't know this was going to be an infomercial here, Russell. Sorry, guys.
Well, no, these are answers to questions. I would be saying the same thing if you weren't here. So I can only talk about my experience, but I do have the comparison with Ed Dames, and I did do 6 months of training with Pam. So I think it's a well-balanced opinion. So there, mister.
All right.
Okay. Remember, I'm the host with the power button too.
Guys, I have control over my own mute button.
On the essays and stuff, I didn't train report obviously, but I have seen the like Russell, I have access to Ingo's training notes and archive files, and all the essays and all the training notes from every student is actually in those archives, and you only have to read them to see how repetitive it was and how hard they had to work on those essays and training notes.
That's what I was just looking at some atomic nears, and yes.
Can I ask
So
a question?
are these secret documents, Daz? I mean, is that something that I can get a hold of, or what's?
For most of them, you have to go to the university, but they have put several hundred of them online. Not the training notes themselves, but there are several hundred training not training files, but files from Ingo's files that you can download from the university website.
What is that?
The University of West Georgia.
All right.
I can see if I can find a link for you.
Yeah, I think somebody had another question.
Can I ask a question? I don't know how to raise my hand in this thing.
Oh, MASH. Yes, go ahead.
Okay. When you start getting visual impressions of the target, do you notice you're getting details of the target first, or the bigger outline of the target? I'm saying, which comes first, the gestalt of it or minor specific details?
Well, the answer to your question is yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Any session is unpredictable how you're going to get stuff in, right?
Mm-hmm.
But generally speaking, when I'm doing it, I get impressions of overall shapes, and it's not even, for me, it's often not even visual. It's kinesthetic. That's the big thing people leave out of this, and partly I fault Ingo for that, because he decided it ought to be called remote viewing, and that leaves out 4 of the other sense modalities, actually 5 of the other sense modalities.
Yeah.
It really should have been called remote perception. And he and I had arguments about that, and he won, of course. He always won our arguments. But the fact is, it's very kinesthetic. When I sketch what I feel. And there's some visual component that comes in too, but generally speaking, I sketch what I feel and where the lines ought to be, where the shapes ought to be to start with. And later on, then it may resolve a little more into details. But I've seen it happen with a lot of students, a lot of viewers, not just students, where they might pick up on a detail first, and then the rest of it grows from that detail. So I don't know if there's a hard and fast rule that you can even state here.
I was just wondering if it's similar to the way we actually see things, where we kind of pick up on small details first, things that stand out, and then we eyes scan around and fill in the rest of the information.
Yeah, it's interesting that there are different visual perceptual modalities, even in just standard, straightforward sight. Oftentimes we see it gestaltically, like you see something and you just get the overall concept, and then you start to discern the details. But you're right, there are times when it goes the other way, when you pick up on a detail and then kind of like what I described. Well, and it's not an accident, because this has not been scientifically proved, but I think it will be if they ever try it. I think we'll be able to establish that the visual processing modules in the brain are as involved in remote viewing as they are in everyday vision. It's just that the data throughput is much less in remote viewing. Okay. And so it would be no surprise if the visual perceptual elements in a remote viewing session would bear some similarity to those same things in just a regular veridical, here I am in the world kind of a visual experience. They're just not nearly as vivid or as defined.
Yeah. I was joking. It's like looking through the world through Coke bottle glasses.
Oh, you mean like Russell Targ does? Yes.
Yeah.
Well, one description.
Someday I'll just a second, Russell. Someday, maybe I'll get permission. I got to go to Hal Puthoff's 80th birthday party a few years ago, and they asked me to do the roast for Hal, and I did a PowerPoint, and I'll tell you, it was hilarious. Poor Hal. Anyway, someday maybe I'll get to turn that, let that go, let that out there, and everybody can get a kick out of it. So anyway, the reason I say that is because I had a joke on Russell about the Coke bottle glasses too. So.
Yeah, MASH, one thing that a phrase that Paul used a couple of times, that really put it into context for the way I started to get what he referred to as valid stage 2 images, this phrase really captures it, like a half remembered dream. You just know there's something there. You try to focus on it and it isn't there. You relax, it comes back, you're like, oh, I got it, and then it's gone again.
Yeah.
So it's just that floaty. So I remember when I had my first first image that did pan out to the feedback, and it was, I don't know how, I mean, I guess you would almost call it surrealistic. There was nothing distinct, but there was a little bit of motion, there was color. So I just said, oh, okay, just the color. So I remember it was like golden and brown and yellow. And then I remembered Paul had told a story where he was describing valid stage 2 imagery, and he told the story, I believe, about one of his first ones where he could see the grass moving instead of the grass just being fixed and, you know, bright, like you could look at it. So Tom McNear says in one of his documents, one of the biggest problems is people wanting to have visuals and expecting visuals and trying to have visuals. That definitely is the path to.
Yeah, that's where your imagination will kick in.
Absolutely. And so for me, I surrender. I just like, okay, maybe I'll never get visuals. And I've relaxed about it. And now I'm just starting, after 3 years of intense training with Paul, just starting to get more visual, which I'm excited about, but I'm not going to try to make it happen.
Yeah.
So let me butt in for a second here. Russell, unfortunately, my contractors are demanding my attention again. So
okay,
I think I'm just going to sign out here and go take care of what I need to take care of here. So folks, great talking to you, and appreciate Russell doing this, and keep talking, you guys. I'm sure.
Thank you so much for joining us, Paul.
You better. You betcha. Good luck.
Okay. All right. So now let me pan the audience here. We're approaching 2.5 hours. I have a couple of people have left. Or do you think we're reaching a natural conclusion, or is there another topic or important question that somebody wants to ask? Okay. So I kind of feel like it's a natural moving down point. Is there anybody that wants to conclude with anything, share something? Otherwise, here in a minute or so, we'll go ahead and wrap up.
Russell, I have a question, and it's not strictly about remote viewing, but it is about something that I saw on something from Ingo's archive that Daz showed me recently. I understand that in the early Scientology, before Scientology got all shitty and culty, when they still had good stuff, in clearing a withheld, like a thing that you don't want to admit that you know is a thing, but I don't know about that concept. Could you elaborate on that for me?
Certainly. A withhold is usually in the sequence of events followed by an overt. So an overt is something you overtly did that was against your ethics or harmed another person. There's also included in that the sin of omission, something you should have done and didn't and don't feel good about. So what will happen is you will withhold that from others, obviously, but at a certain point over time, you're withholding it also from yourself. The theory being that a spiritual being in their native state is highly ethical and very oriented towards the well-being of others. So selfish violations, the being considers a crime against themselves. And in one sense of the word, Hubbard didn't really teach karma, like there's some sort of external justice system. It was more like the being just beating himself up until he pays the price. The real trick with the overt withhold, then what they call motivator justifier sequence, is this. The overt came first, period. And it was just a matter of free will. What happens is most beings will put the motivator or the justifier next, meaning the reason I did that is because so-and-so did this. And then they'll withhold the whole sequence, and it ends up, if you just picture like a log jam in the flow of a being's expression, the other thing that will happen is that by blaming the other for whatever happened, now you have to justify it by diminishing that person. So a good example is a guy goes to a party, spills some wine on the carpet, looks around, very expensive carpet, looks around like, okay, nobody saw it. Walks out, and the host of the house gives them a strange look. Now that person's like, do they know I spilled that wine or not? And then pretty soon down the road, they're like, oh, that person, they're a terrible host. Nobody should go to their house for parties. So it becomes a massive inversion. When a person starts various forms of these processing, Scientology had a thing called check the roots or rudiments, fundamentals. Is there anything you're upset about in present time? Kind of like the personal inclemency declaration. Is there anything you have done that you're not happy about? And when you do those types of sessions on a galvanic skin response device, if somebody's withholding, I mean, you can see it. It's evident, that little bit, that thing starts to come forward and then they shut the door on it. And you can see that energetic action. How that is conveyed through the hands, I don't understand the full mechanics, but I've been using a meter for years, for thousands of hours of sessions. And it's amazing the little tiny things you can detect. When we think about what is tough to psychologically encounter for ourselves, we think, oh, it's a loss of somebody, or it's grief, or the hardest thing in any session with any being, and the thing that the spiritual being appears to most want to avoid, is guilt and failure. That's the hardest thing for a session partner to cough up. So a withhold is just one part of a process of an overt, a withhold, a motivator, and a justifier.
The reason I asked that was because in a later version of CRV, which just had the stages listed, that was quite different from what we think of as CRV. There was, I think there was two. I don't know. Daz has got the material.
Yeah, no, I've seen it. I've seen
yeah,
it,
and it uses the word withheld twice right next to each other, and it just made me think. Could he maybe be drawing from that? Is there maybe a stage in CRV which is, what are the things that I don't want to look at that maybe remind me about something about me that I don't want to, is there some of my own baggage that is stopping me getting target data or something? Do you think there's anything in that, or am I reading too much into it? Maybe I am.
No, once the last letter between Ingo and L. Ron Hubbard took place in 1979. The last course that Ingo was registered as having taken was 1982. 1982, there was a big purge of the church. The Hubbard faithful were axed, and then the rest, defected or departed willingly. I believe Ingo was in that latter crowd. As many ex-Scientologists do, they will change terminology to explain the concept, because there are some great concepts, some great ideas, some great things. But even then, you can find all of those in ancient literature of all sorts. So it's not that they were original to Scientology, they were just incorporated into it. So Ingo, and you can see it in Resurrecting the Mysterious, was describing a lot of Scientology type concepts, but again, not unique to Scientology, but that's where he learned them or became familiar with them. And then he just changes the language. So much of Scientology could be found in aspects of Freud, aspects of Carl Jung, aspects of Buddhism, a lot, to believe it or not, with Hinduism. some of the more ethical type structures found in Western versions of Christianity. So it was, you know, if anything, Hubbard was a master compiler.
Yeah.
So that Ingo would be utilizing what's common to all of us, and it happens to be a word the Scientology made up to describe something.
Do you like my conspiracy theory that when he says stage, whatever it was, is withheld, that he wants it to exoterically appear to be that he's saying, I don't want to tell you what it is, but he's subtly saying, actually, this stage is about the things that you don't want to face because they contradict the stuff that
you might, in that respect, you might be reading a little bit too much into it.
Well, I thought so. It's a bit out on a limb.
Well, no, not necessarily. There's no doubt that he would be highly aware of our personal filters and barriers inhibiting remote viewing. I would have no doubt. So I believe you're correct on that. Now, what would he mean by withheld? This is my theory on that. Remember, he had the gradients of the secret, quote unquote, secret levels of Scientology. So OT1 through OT7 in his case. Each one. Now, the only valid justification for those, I've been through all 7 of those levels myself. The only valid justification is level 6 is a little bit out of gradient for someone walking into the door. So when you come to remote viewing, you learn stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, and then let's say someone took you from stage 3 to say, okay, let's go remote view underground bases. That's out of gradient. So you would withhold or set that down the road for that person to help him get a foundation first. I can assure you with wholehearted emphasis, there was nothing radically secret or mystical or undiscovered in any of those levels at all. But if a person coming in the door just wanted to say, I want to communicate better at work so I can get a raise, you're not going to throw them into, you know, the history. Yeah. Right. So that's the case. So I think what he's saying there, and let's just say, what if those 2 withholds were what Tom McNear revealed, say a stage 9 and 10, where you're actually bringing things back and forth from the site or altering time and space at the site. So if you go to Paul's class and you're expecting to learn how to do an ideogram and some descriptors, he says, hey, today we're going to go alter time and space. You're probably going to leave the class, declare Paul a little crazy, and not learn remote viewing.
Yeah.
Now I'll give you one tip. Daz facilitated a conversation between Ellie, Ingo's niece, and myself. And in this, my intent was, there's a lot that I've withheld regarding the whole Scientology dynamic out of respect for Ingo, because as soon as someone hears that word today, they don't know what it was back in 1966. So yeah. it's just, and then you don't.
I've only recently found out that it used to be good and have some good technology. You know, it's not a good thing now. So you just think, oh, it must always have been that way. And I now know that's not true, but it's not the assumption.
But even then, the technology is essentially extrapolations of the cities that you could read about in Patanjali.
Right?
Right. It is. There's a couple things. But anyways, back to the good news. So in this conversation, I've personally withheld a lot out of respect for Ellie, for the estate, and not knowing Ingo's wishes. So Dad set Ellie and I up to talk, and she's very open to bringing more of that into public view, not just Scientology, because that's a big controversial subject, but Ingo was fully involved in theosophy, astrology. I was surprised. I didn't know that he had moved out of Scientology in 82, and then maybe somewhere around 85, 86, picked up a Scientology derivative called Avatar. And that was revealed to me in the in Resurrecting the Mysterious. Scientology, I liken it, it was like a hand grenade. It went off. But a lot of the shrapnel went out, and good people took things about it and improved them and took all the craziness and other factors out. So Avatar was one of those things, knowledgeism, one called Traum, some others. And I've practiced or studied with a lot of those people. They left Scientology and tried to bring the good parts out and make them useful. So I was surprised that Ingo had continued that. Hopefully, and I was very pleased with Ellie's grace and her wanting, the story to come out. I think she knows I'm going to do it in a very respectful way and try to navigate the waters, being as familiar with it as I am, where it somehow has to be differentiated from everything we've read and seen since 1982. Most of the really negative press has accumulated since then. And once we find that finesse, as Daz has stated, there's still some private aspects of the archives, and I was asked at one point to help sort out that aspect, the Scientology aspect. So I've been working through that. And so as this conversation unfolds, it might be that I go ahead and do another presentation similar to the underground base presentation, but on Ingo and Scientology. And then we just need to figure out the context to show that that was only one little, what do they call it, when a painter has all the little splashes of color on a palette or whatever. Scientology was just one color of paint on his palette. So we're going to contextualize it and then bring it. But for those that are curious, I'll just make it real simple for you. There is no irreplaceable aspect of Scientology that made it into remote viewing specifically. Stage one has nothing to do with it. Ideogram was being used, at least officially as early as the 1800s. Stage two does have a little bit to do with it, but who isn't trying to describe things? Stage two was used if a person, like we were just talking a while ago about a half-remembered dream, right? So if a person is like having a half-remembered dream or memory, I would say to them, can you see any colors? Can you hear anything? Can you feel anything? To try to entice that thing into their full awareness. That's almost standard psychological process for somebody trying to recover a repressed memory. So Ingo, a lot of people forget, and much, much more than the secret, so-called secret OT levels. What he learned was becoming a class 6 auditor. He sat for thousands of hours with other beings, helping them sort out and handle their own mental contents. And that requires a lot of listening, a lot of documenting, understanding the right questions. And stage two was a set of those questions to just help elicit that memory into their full awareness. Stage three was discovered at ASPR when Ingo was all wired up, and then he didn't want to have to break away to go back into language while he was, so he just literally said, hey, I'm an artist, hand me a clipboard. Stage four, you could say there's a couple of elements there. Stage five would have nothing to do with Scientology. In stage six, in Scientology, they had to, and I've done, a lot of hours of clay modeling, because they always presented, if you can make it with your hands and put it on the table, chances are it's probably real. So we would get concepts like you're supposed to, just theoretically, like the Buddhist Kwan, what's the sound of one hand clapping? Make it in clay. And at a certain point, you're just like, I can't. And it's like, okay, one hand doesn't make the sound of clapping. So the clay modeling wasn't bring over, but back when in the 40s and 50s, they were starting to use clay modeling in public schools, where a teacher or an educator from that system brought clay modeling to Hubbard. Hubbard didn't originate it. So when you sort through this all, there's no reason for anybody to be afraid that some dark art made it into remote viewing.
No, that really wasn't my question.
Oh, no, I didn't think you.
I just dig into what he meant by those stages that he say withheld. Whether
No, and I didn't think that was your dilemma. I'm responding kind of in a tirade from a lot of private messages and different things. Your
Okay,
question was
that wasn't
excellent.
where I was coming from, though. But
Oh,
this is
no,
an
yeah.
interesting thing. Sorry to interrupt you.
Oh, no, not at all. I'm glad for the clarification, because I do go on rampages on this topic once in a while. But I do believe the withheld is related to a gradient that he doesn't think should be plopped on someone just walking in the door. Okay, I guess I've had my soapbox. Ooh. All right. So no, it's an intense topic for me, and I would like it to be understood, and I'd like people to feel relieved. It's not what you've been told in certain points. It's not some dramatic conspiracy. Yeah, there were little glitches here and there. Some of those Daz, knows about, and some of them, we'll just to tell the truth and get it out in the air. And with Ellie's guidance to do it properly within what she perceives to be Ingo's wishes, it'll get done here over time.
Russell,
yes, sir.
Did you say that you might do a talk on kind of Ingo's approach in combination with Scientology?
No, not so much. No, it's not. It's going to be kind of a separate thing. What was his involvement? How did it relate to this? What can be done to diminish the conspiracies? I've just withheld, not knowing Ellie's wishes. So I contacted Daz and I said, look, I'm getting a lot of people asking about this. I'm not going to go into any detail. Deborah Lynn Katz did invite me to do a talk with her, which is out there on her YouTube, where towards the end of Deborah, John Knowles, and myself talking on the topic, I emphasized what were some of the clear points and tried to immediately appease some of the distress that certain people feel over this topic. Apparently Ellie had seen that. Then I contacted Daz and said, look, I really want to know her wishes before I go down this path. And he graciously introduced us on email. We're a couple of conversations into it. So she's been incredibly gracious to us all, bringing these unpublished books and manuscripts. And she has the highest regard for her uncle. So I just want to participate with that rollout. And it looks like it's underway, but it could be, a few months at the minimum.
I gotcha. I wanted to ask that. I don't even know how to begin saying what I'm thinking of saying, but you, during one of the remote viewing talks over the summer, you introduced me to Scientology, and I don't even know that you did this, but you sent me a message regarding the Grand Tour. You remember this evening? So I did a modified version of the Grand Tour during my meditation that night, and it was this amazing experience for me. I thought it was incredible, and so I went on to search, what is this Grand Tour? And then when I saw that it was a part of Scientology, I was like, damn it, Russell, why did you get me to do something Scientology? Because I have this, I think a lot of people have these preconceived notions, of course, about Scientology because of everything in the media. But if you were to, even separate from Ingo Swann and his niece, if you were to talk about certain portions of Scientology and how good parts were taken out of it and repurposed in ways, it might assist some people with overcoming some things that would otherwise really benefit their personal practices. So I wanted to mention that to you because you talk about Scientology a good bit. And it's one of those things where as you talk about it, there are certain ears that aren't educated about it that will just shut.
Absolutely. And so my reference point is how many people private message me. So you guys don't see that. And so when I talk about it, I'm kind of already and indirectly trying to alleviate undue concern. And so it's like I said, it's more of a little bit of maybe a personal agenda or button that I have where I'd like people not to misunderstand the connection or assign something to it that doesn't belong there.
Yeah. That makes sense. That sounds like it could be an uphill battle sometimes, just because some people will not know to listen to certain aspects of things. You said a little while ago about how remote viewing doesn't have any of the dark arts put into it, which I heard that and I thought, it's so funny how many things we do on a daily basis or think that you could tie to a dark art almost. Like you look at remote viewing and how, the reason I think we have remote viewing between Russian spies, these dark things. We were looking at the Russians saying, oh man, well, it seems like they have a spy program, so we want that too. And then even before all of that, I think some of the ties of remote viewing to the Thule Society in Germany, you look at those things and you see where a lot of these things that we're using do have kind of a questionable origin, but we don't all know the history. So it helps us approach remote viewing more easily.
Yeah, literally, as far as I'm aware, and Daz, correct me if you have something otherwise, the first time the word traveling clairvoyance appears is in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. It's pure yogiism. And they believe they could take I think it's called the Anja chakra, and that is for some reason portable and it can travel. Ingo was adamant in one of his earliest, I think it was in his first Irva conference talk, he even held up and showed which copy of Patanjali that he loved and studied. And of course, he did that with like 3 or 4 books doing that. And I, of course, had to go buy all 3 or 4. And then I used to look at his bibliographies and then read the source materials. At a certain point, you can't read everything Ingo read. He had a discipline and passion that exceeds my own, to be honest. So he understood these things as having much earlier origins. Yogis, now they have, just like anything, black magic, white magic, there are yogis who don't use magic at all because there's only one city that matters is love. Then you have ones that want to do beneficial or white magic, and then you have ones that want to do harmful or black magic. So it's all a matter of intention. It's the same tool. So you can just not get engaged in that kind of thing, or if you wanted to get engaged in one side or the other, or if you want to find a way to blend them both, and maybe sometimes you do good things, maybe sometimes it's all a possibility. For me, I don't have interest in any of that stuff. I don't want to move things with my mind. I want to try to understand how things are, do my best to be a good person, and then if it's possible to be helpful to others, I'd like to do that. That's it. That's where I'm at now.
Very well put.
I'm just going to sign off now. Thanks for a good chat.
Okay. Yeah. Hey, thanks, Rick.
Okay. No trouble. I'll catch you soon.
Okay. Adios. All right. So we had a little, what do you call it there? A sequel to the earlier meeting.
Yeah, I'm going to drop too.
Okay. So we'll go ahead and end the whole thing. I'd like to thank everybody for coming. It was fun. Questions are awesome. It was nice to have Paul here. Daz, thank you again for keeping this platform alive for everybody. So with that, we shall end.
Thank you, Russell.
Thanks, Russell.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Everyone.